this is a very difficult conversation to have, not just for families, but I think for South Africans at large that are watching this. And I think it is also worth putting a disclaimer there that it will be a bit of a sensitive conversation. We know that when this kind of news breaks that somebody has died by suicide, why do we think that so many communities respond first with denial or silence rather than compassion?
Thank you so much. I think it's because, first and foremost, as you've said, suicide, unlike a normal death, if I could put it that way, it is something that comes quite sudden. And in most cases, those who take their lives don't, speak out loud. There would be signs which are also not easy to read because and there are those that are extreme signs, which one can easily see that there is something wrong. And I think it is because of the shock that the families experience immediately you hear that your loved one has taken their life.
Yeah, and often when we hear families say those exact words, my loved one would never take their own life, what really is being expressed there? Is it love? Is it fear of what people think? As you said, it is an element of shock, but I think sometimes there's a bit of denial in there as well.
There is denial, and I think those who are experts in psychology and other areas where they deal with this kind of issues, they would tell you that there are certain steps of mourning, and part of those stages is denial. Because how would somebody that I just spent an hour, a minute, a day with, they're now gone, So there is that, and I think there is the shock that comes because death is something that one cannot fully say, I have an experience of, I understand, and especially when it involves people who are closest to you. How we react to it, it's quite different, and it is always shocking.
And I would also assume that in African culture, but also in religion as well, death is quite a sacred thing, and suicide often is seen as a taboo or even sinful. Where do those beliefs come from? And how do they shape how families grieve or even speak about suicide?
Unfortunately, there's a conversation I think is difficult to have because a conversation about death in African communities is not that welcomed. But as you say, yes, culture and religion plays a huge role in how we react and understand death. For example, in African culture, for example, their understanding of death, for example, there is, for just a lack of a better way of putting it in English, what one could call good death and bad death. And when we speak of good death, we are speaking of a death of a person who dies at their old age, who have undergone all the rituals, have lived their life to the fullest. That is what Africans celebrate. That is a death that is easily accepted. When it comes to a bad death, it is a death where somebody, as you've mentioned, take their own life, where somebody's murdered, an accident, and any form of death that is unnatural, that is considered a bad death. A bad death because in African perspective, one is expected to live their life to the fullest. Because for us, for Africans, death is a transition into the world, the spirit world, or the world of the ancestors. And one qualifies for that transition when they have lived their full life. And what becomes a challenge to families is if one has died a natural death, there is those questions about have they rested in peace? Are they accepted by their ancestors and so forth? And when it comes to religion as well, because life is sacred, in Christian perspective, for example, many believe that suicide is sin because life is a gift from God, and none of us have a right to take that life away from us other than God. And there is that belief that if one takes their life, then they would not go to heaven as others believe.
Sure.
So those are some of the beliefs and understanding that makes it difficult for families to handle such deaths, because those questions come to mind. Has our loved ones rested well? Would they be received by God? Would they be received by their ancestors?
Sure. And of course, I can imagine that this has been the type of conversation and topic that has been emerging from South African households following the passing of the late ambassador. But just very quickly, tell us, we've seen, of course, from the Mthethwa family going all the way to Paris to practice that custom of fetching one's spirit, one's body. Talk to us about what some of the rituals that make it harder for families when there is a death by suicide, if you can, very quickly, Professor.
There are different rituals practiced by different ethnic groups. When it comes to a death by suicide, and again, it also depends, because there are those who take poisonous substances to take their lives, shoot themselves, and so forth. But what I can briefly say is that kind of death changes what I would call a normal way of burying our loved ones, because there is that sense that this is not a normal death, and therefore what is normally a practice as families would change in that regard. In some instances, when it is an unnatural death, accident, or suicide, the body of the deceased would not come in the household, would be outside the yard, or would come in the morning on the day of the funeral.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jacob Mokhutso, there, the lecturer from the University of Pretoria, talking to us about something that has been very close to South African homes, and very particularly the home of the late Ambassador Nathi Mthethwa.